Hello and welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be talking about some of the dumb things that I wish I didn't do in my journey, in my fitness journey over, the last 10, 15 years. Now, ultimately, although I won't say I regret things because I learned from them, and I think that's the important takeaway message is that I actually learned from those things. But these are things that I wish I probably would have done differently. The number one thing that I wish I would have done differently is learn to properly warm up and learn to listen to my body's signals. Now, I've always said that I lift weights because I want it to enhance my life. I don't want it to dominate my life. And I never want to do anything that's going to take away from other parts of my life, like practicing football with my son or baseball or those things. And a few years back, I remember I was bench pressing and I started to have shoulder pain and I wasn't properly warming up. I mean, sometimes I would go in there and do like one or two sets and that's it. And then I'd throw on more weight than I needed. And I was having to do the bench press in a way where I was like having to isolate my shoulder in a way. Like all these red flags were popping up. Aaron, stop bench pressing for the time being. Aaron, stop adding weight when your technique is falling apart. And I just ignored them all. And it got to the point where I couldn't even raise my arm to throw or catch a football without pain. And so, was what I was doing, was it worth it? Ultimately, no. Like, my technique was terrible. I was adding weight when I shouldn't have been. I was ignoring the signs that were blaring. My body was blaringly giving me. And ultimately, I had to spend a year rehabbing my shoulder. And the flip side is that year turned out to be kind of the best thing for my lifting career because I really had to lower the weight and a bunch of exercises. I had to focus on form for the first time without concerning myself with constantly pushing weight up higher and higher, or at least slowing down the rate at which I pushed up weight, staying with weights much longer for a few weeks to a month, and then making sure that my form was spot on before I added weight to the bar. So that kind of leads me into my next point. There's no required exercise you must do, especially if it's causing you pain. So I was continuing to do things that at the time weren't really working for me. Like, would I have had the same shoulder issues had I chosen dumbbells or a machine versus the bar? I don't know. I can't go back in time and change those things. But now, as I'm programming, now as I listen to clients and issues they have, I'm much more mindful of that. And in my own programming as well, I really have to challenge myself to say, why am I putting this in? Like, what am I trying to get out of it? Because you don't have to bench press for hypertrophy. There are other tools that you can use. And so that's something that now I wish I would have just done it differently. And so choosing not that there's any wrong exercises, an exercise may just be wrong for you. But another mistake I made kind of in that area is in the beginning of my career, I always just read, you didn't have to do direct arm work. You could just do chin ups, you could do bench, you could deadlift, you could squat, and your abs would grow, your arms would grow, even without indirect work. And although there is some truth to that, my arms basically stayed the same. And it wasn't until I started to add in direct arm work that my arms started to grow. It wasn't until I had periods of, direct work for my shoulders to try to focus on those. I mean, I'm talking years. Like, my arms just stayed the same, and I kept trying to just add more weight. I didn't change exercises, and ultimately my arms didn't grow, my shoulders didn't grow. And when I started to do direct work, when I switched up the exercise selection, lo and behold, I started to progress. Now, it is a balance, and it is sometimes we have to really evaluate what it is we're trying to accomplish. And in my case, I was wanting to grow my arms, but I wasn't doing anything to solve the problem. And the results I got showed that. Although I was progressing in other areas, my arms weren't growing. And so that is an area now, too, it's why having a goal is important. So you know how to track your progress. And I want to grow biceps. Well, am I doing things to allow me to grow biceps? And if my biceps are not growing, then I can look, well, am I giving my body the calories needed to support tissue growth? If no, then you can address the problem directly. If I'm not doing direct bicep work, you can address the problem directly. And now moving into another area where I wish I had just not been so emotional is spending more time in building phases. I was the classic, I'm gonna bulk, and I would gain a little bit of weight and I would freak out and I'd immediately jump into a cut. And I just did this cycle off and on. And although I was putting in effort in the gym, although I was very, very consistent with my diet, with showing up for workouts, I was eating really, really good foods that support health, that support energy levels, mood, all of that. I wasn't giving myself enough time into a muscle building phase to actually grow tissue. And now that I understand so much more, everyone wants to remain super lean while putting on slabs of muscle, but the reality is that we're going to gain some fat along with muscle. And if your weight isn't slowly trending up, maybe debatable, but we can argue that you're not maximizing hypertrophy. And so now I accept that if I want to try to maximize hypertrophy, if I want to try to reach my genetic potential, and I think I can push past that, then I have to give my body the fuel it needs to support muscle growth. And yes, it is uncomfortable, but the fat can be stripped off. And that too can be a psychological process where you will experience a little bit of hunger. You will maybe have to give up some foods you really love, but ultimately the goal you're going after is worth more to you in those times than the temporary discomfort that you feel. And so now that is something that I wish I would have just been told that, like, hey, this is how it is. And really the psychological aspect of it, where it can be very, very uncomfortable when your clothes start to fit differently. It can be challenging when you feel like you're losing your hard-earned results. Muscles, or you're just not quite as lean. So that was tough, but it's a lesson that I'm glad I finally figured out, and I've spent more time in muscle building phases, giving my body the calories it needs to fuel my workouts, but also fuel my life outside. And the other, this is probably the most frustrating for me, but thinking that an off day of eating or an off weekend of eating would just kill my progress. I spent a lot of time just with fear of food and thinking that if I had an off meal plan or if I was going on vacation and I didn't keep everything super dialed in, that I was just going to gain all of this fat. And I want to say over the past like 3 to 5 years, that's been the biggest change for me, is knowing that these, Thanksgiving with family or Christmas dinner or birthdays, that that time to it's a time to mentally recharge. It's a time to step away and to be very involved with family and to enjoy the foods that I'm eating, whether it be on vacation or it's a holiday, or simply because the schedule has just gotten super crazy and I, didn't have time to prep a meal prior. And that's okay. You can still make tremendous progress week after week, even though you may not be eating exactly how you do 90% of the time. So those things, that is the big one for me, because I specifically remember, taking some amazing vacations and skipping out on the food and just having a couple bites here and there. And in hindsight, I'm like, what were you thinking, Aaron? Because an off day, once if you just get right back on track, even an off week, if you just get right back on track within a couple of weeks, you're going to be right where you were, if not further ahead, because you're recharged, because you're reanimated by the process. And so those are four things that, four errors I feel like I've made in my lifting career, that I won't say I wish that I could go back and change those things, because ultimately they've led me to where I am today. And now I better understand my clients' perspective when they are struggling with some of the same things. And so at the end of the day, I've learned from it, and I grew as a coach and as a person, and I can apply those lessons in other areas of my life. So I wouldn't change them, but hopefully you can learn from me and you don't make the same mistakes. And I hope you found value in the content I've shared with you today. And if you did, or if you didn't, go ahead and hit the like button. You can subscribe. My name is Aaron Sanchez. Thank you for watching today.